You know that voice in your head right now? The one that's been telling you you're not good enough, that you're going to fail, that everyone's judging you, that things will never get better? What if I told you that voice isn't really you? What if I told you that the negative thoughts cycling through your mind right now, the ones that feel so real, so true, so permanent, are actually just electrical signals in your brain that you can learn to control? Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the hidden psychology behind why your brain generates negative thoughts, why they feel so overwhelmingly real, and most importantly, the exact techniques backed by neuroscience and psychology that can help you break free from them once and for all. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending everything is fine. This is about understanding the actual mechanisms in your brain that create these thoughts and using that knowledge to reclaim control over your own mind. So if you've ever felt trapped by your own thinking, if you've ever wondered why negative thoughts seem to come so easily, while positive ones feel forced and fake, if you've spent years trying to fight these thoughts and nothing seems to work, then what you're about to learn could change everything. Let's start with something most people don't realize. Your brain is not designed to make you happy. I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. Your brain is designed to keep you alive, and there's a massive difference between those two things. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in environments where danger was everywhere. A rustling in the bushes could be the wind, or it could be a predator about to attack. The humans who survived weren't the optimists who assumed everything would be fine. They were the ones who anticipated threats, who worried, who stayed vigilant, who assumed the worst and prepared for it. This is what psychologists call the negativity bias, and it's hardwired into every single one of us. Your brain is essentially a survival machine that's always scanning for threats, problems, and potential dangers. And here's the kicker. Your brain can't tell the difference between a real physical threat like a lion chasing you and a psychological threat like someone thinking badly of you or failing at a presentation. To your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for processing threats, they're both dangerous, and they both trigger the same stress response. So when you have a negative thought, your brain treats it as important survival information. It flags it, amplifies it, and makes sure you pay attention to it. This is why negative thoughts feel so much more powerful and real than positive ones. Your brain is literally programmed to prioritize them, but it gets even more interesting when we look at how thoughts actually work. Most people think that thoughts are just random mental events that happen to us, like weather passing through our minds. But neuroscience shows us something different. Every thought you have is a neural pathway in your brain, a specific pattern of neurons firing together. And here's the crucial part. The more often a particular thought pattern fires, the stronger that neural pathway becomes. Neuroscientists call this Hebbian learning, summarized by the phrase neurons that fire together wire together. This means that if you frequently think thoughts like, I'm not good enough, or I always mess things up, or people don't like me, you're literally strengthening the neural pathways that make those thoughts more likely to occur in the future. It's like walking through a forest. The first time you walk a particular route, you have to push through branches and undergrowth, and it's difficult. But if you walk that same path every day for months or years, eventually you create a clear, well-worn trail that becomes the default, easiest route to take. Your negative thoughts work exactly the same way. They've become your brain's default pathways, the mental highways that your mind travels down automatically, without you even consciously choosing to go there. Now let's talk about something called the default mode network, or DMN for short. This is a network of brain regions that becomes active when you're not focused on the outside world, when your mind is wandering, when you're daydreaming, or just letting your thoughts drift. And here's what researchers have discovered. In people with depression, anxiety, and chronic negative thinking, the default mode network tends to get stuck in what's called rumination. Rumination is when your mind keeps cycling through the same negative thoughts over and over again, like a broken record that won't stop playing. You might replay a conversation from 3 years ago, analyzing what you said wrong. You might imagine future scenarios where everything goes badly. You might create entire narratives about how people perceive you, what they're thinking about you, and none of it is based on actual evidence, just your mind spinning stories. The problem with rumination is that it feels productive. It feels like you're solving problems or protecting yourself or figuring things out, but you're not. You're just strengthening those negative neural pathways, making the rumination pattern deeper and more automatic. Brain imaging studies show that people who ruminate frequently actually have increased activity in the areas of the brain associated with self-referential thinking and decreased activity in areas associated with problem-solving and moving forward. In other words, rumination keeps you stuck analyzing the problem without ever moving toward a solution. Another critical piece of the puzzle is what psychologists call cognitive distortions. These are systematic errors in thinking that reinforce negative thought patterns. The psychologist Aaron Beck, who developed cognitive behavioral therapy, identified several key distortions that most people with negative thinking engage in without even realizing it. There's all-or-nothing thinking, where you see things in black and white categories with no middle ground. If something isn't perfect, it's a complete failure. There's overgeneralization, where a single negative event becomes evidence of a never-ending pattern. You mess up once and think you always mess up, or you'll never get it right. There's mental filtering, where you focus exclusively on negative details while filtering out anything positive. You could receive 10 compliments and 1 criticism, and your mind will fixate entirely on the criticism, discounting or forgetting all the positive feedback. There's catastrophizing, where you automatically assume the worst possible outcome will happen. A slight headache becomes a brain tumor. Your partner being quiet means they're going to leave you. A mistake at work means you'll definitely get fired. And then there's personalization, where you take responsibility for things that aren't actually your fault or assume everything people do is a reaction to you. Your friend is in a bad mood, and you immediately think you did something wrong. These cognitive distortions are like warped lenses that distort your perception of reality. But because you're looking through them constantly, you don't realize they're there. You think you're seeing reality clearly, but you're actually seeing a distorted version filtered through these systematic thinking errors. Let's also talk about the role of emotions in negative thinking. Most people think thoughts create emotions, but it actually works both ways. Yes, thinking I'm worthless can make you feel sad, but also, if you're already in a low emotional state, your brain will start generating thoughts that match that emotional state. This is called mood-congruent memory and mood-congruent thinking. When you're feeling down, your brain has easier access to negative memories and negative interpretations of events. When you're feeling anxious, your brain more easily generates worried thoughts about the future. This creates a vicious cycle where negative thoughts create negative emotions, which then generate more negative thoughts, which create stronger negative emotions, and round it goes. The longer this cycle continues, the more entrenched it becomes. This is why depression and anxiety disorders aren't just about feeling sad or worried. They're about being stuck in self-reinforcing loops where your thoughts, emotions, and even your physiology all work together to keep you trapped in negativity. Now here's where things get really interesting, and this is the foundation for how we actually end negative thinking. Despite everything I've just told you about neural pathways and brain chemistry and cognitive distortions, your brain is not fixed, it's not permanent, it's not unchangeable. Your brain has what scientists call neuroplasticity, which is the ability to form new neural connections and pathways throughout your entire life. This means that just as you've trained your brain to default to negative thinking through repetition and reinforcement, you can train your brain to develop new, healthier thought patterns. You can create new neural pathways that become stronger than the old negative ones. You can literally rewire your brain. And this is crucial, you can't do it by fighting your thoughts. You can't do it by trying to force yourself to think positively. You can't do it by suppressing or pushing away negative thoughts. In fact, research shows that trying to suppress thoughts actually makes them stronger and more persistent. This is called the ironic process theory, or the white bear problem. If I tell you right now, don't think about a white bear, what immediately pops into your mind? A white bear. The same thing happens when you try not to think your negative thoughts. The very act of trying to push them away actually reinforces them and makes them more likely to return, often with even greater intensity. So what actually works? The most effective approaches to ending negative thinking involve changing your relationship with your thoughts, rather than trying to change the thoughts themselves. This is the core insight behind approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy. mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and metacognitive therapy. Instead of seeing your thoughts as facts about reality that must be true, you learn to see them as mental events, as things your brain produces, as electrical signals that don't necessarily correspond to truth or reality. This process is called cognitive diffusion or decentering. It's the ability to observe your thoughts without getting caught up in them, without believing them automatically, without letting them dictate your emotions and behaviors. When you have the thought, "I'm a failure," instead of automatically accepting that as a true statement about who you are, you learn to recognize it as a thought your brain produced. You can even label it. There's the "I'm a failure" thought again. This might sound like a small distinction, but it's actually enormous. When you believe your thoughts are facts, they have total power over you. When you recognize them as mental events that your brain produces, they lose their grip. You create space between you and your thoughts. You're no longer your thoughts. You're the awareness that observes your thoughts. And from that place of awareness, you have choice. One of the most powerful techniques for developing this skill is mindfulness meditation. And I want to be clear about what I mean by that, because mindfulness has been so misunderstood and commodified. Mindfulness isn't about relaxation or feeling peaceful, though those can be side effects. Mindfulness is about training your attention. It's about noticing when your mind has wandered into negative thinking and gently bringing your attention back to the present moment. When you sit down to meditate, you might focus on your breath, and within seconds your mind will wander. You'll start thinking about what you need to do later, or replaying something that happened earlier, or worrying about the future. And when you notice that your mind has wandered, that moment of noticing is actually the most important moment. That's when you're strengthening the neural networks associated with metacognitive awareness, with being able to observe your own thinking process. And then you gently bring your attention back to your breath without judging yourself for getting distracted. And then your mind wanders again, and you notice again, and you bring it back again. And you do this hundreds of times in a single meditation session. What you're doing is essentially going to the gym for your attention. You're training the mental muscle that allows you to notice when you're caught in negative thinking and consciously redirect your attention elsewhere. Brain imaging studies have shown that regular mindfulness practice actually changes the physical structure of your brain. It increases gray matter density in regions associated with self-regulation and decreases activity in the amygdala, the fear and threat center. People who practice mindfulness regularly show reduced rumination, reduced stress reactivity, and increased ability to regulate their emotions. But meditation alone isn't enough for most people. You also need to actively restructure your thought patterns using cognitive techniques. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in, and I want to give you a practical framework you can start using immediately. First, you need to become aware of your automatic negative thoughts. Most negative thinking happens so quickly and automatically that you're not even conscious of it. You just suddenly feel bad or anxious or depressed, but you haven't noticed the thoughts that triggered those feelings. So start keeping a thought record. When you notice your mood shifting or feel yourself getting anxious or depressed, pause and ask yourself, what was just going through my mind? What was I thinking right before I started feeling this way? Write it down. Get the thought out of your head and onto paper. This alone is powerful because it externalizes the thought. It's no longer just swirling around in your mind. It's a sentence on a page that you can examine. Second, once you've identified the automatic negative thought, examine the evidence for and against it. If your thought is "nobody likes me," you would write down all the evidence that supports that thought and all the evidence that contradicts it. Be honest and thorough. Most people find that when they actually examine the evidence objectively, their negative thoughts are based on very little real evidence and lots of assumptions, mind reading and catastrophizing. There's usually substantial evidence that contradicts the negative thought that they've been completely ignoring because of their mental filter. Third, generate alternative explanations or interpretations. Your negative thought is just one possible interpretation of events, but there are always others. If a friend didn't text you back, your automatic thought might be they're mad at me or they don't want to be friends anymore. Alternative explanations might include they're busy, they saw the message and forgot to respond, they're having a difficult day, their phone died. They're planning to respond when they have more time. These alternatives aren't necessarily true either. The point is that your automatic negative interpretation isn't necessarily true. When you generate alternatives, you're breaking the pattern of automatically accepting your first negative thought as fact. Fourth, evaluate the usefulness of the thought. Even if a negative thought contains some grain of truth, is thinking it helpful? Does it move you toward your goals and values? Does it help you solve problems or take constructive action? Or does it just make you feel worse and keep you stuck? This is a key question because sometimes we hold on to negative thoughts because we believe they're serving some protective function. But when we honestly evaluate their usefulness, we realize they're not helping us at all. They're just causing suffering. Another incredibly effective technique is called worry exposure or anxiety exposure, which comes from exposure therapy. Many negative thoughts are actually predictions about bad things that will happen in the future. I'll fail. People will judge me. I'll be rejected. I'll embarrass myself. These thoughts create anxiety, and anxiety makes you want to avoid the situations that trigger these thoughts. But avoidance actually strengthens the anxiety and makes the negative thoughts more powerful. The thoughts never get tested against reality. They just remain as looming threats in your mind. Exposure involves deliberately facing the situations you're afraid of, not to torture yourself, but to gather real evidence about what actually happens. When you avoid giving presentations because you're terrified you'll embarrass yourself, that fear stays abstract and enormous. But when you actually give presentations repeatedly, you gather concrete evidence. Maybe you do make some mistakes, but you don't die. People don't point and laugh, you survive. And each time you do it, your brain starts learning at a deep level that the catastrophic outcomes you've been imagining don't actually happen. The negative thoughts lose their power because they keep being proven wrong by actual experience. This is why exposure therapy is so effective for anxiety disorders. You're not just changing your thoughts, you're changing your brain's learned associations about what's actually dangerous versus what's safe. Let's also talk about the power of behavioral activation, which is one of the most effective interventions for depression. When you're stuck in negative thinking, you typically withdraw. You stop doing things you enjoy. You isolate yourself. You stay in bed. You avoid challenges. And in the short term, this might feel like self-protection, but in the long term, it makes everything worse. When you withdraw from life, you give yourself fewer opportunities for positive experiences, positive feedback, and accomplishment. Your brain then has more evidence for your negative thoughts. See, I am worthless, I'm not doing anything, nobody wants to be around me. Behavioral activation involves deliberately engaging in activities, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. You schedule activities that used to bring you pleasure or give you a sense of accomplishment, and you do them whether you feel motivated or not. This is counterintuitive because we usually think motivation comes first and then action follows. But in behavioral activation, it's the opposite. Action comes first and motivation follows. When you start doing things, moving your body, connecting with people, engaging in activities, you start generating positive experiences and accomplishments that provide evidence against your negative thoughts. Your mood starts to improve, and as your mood improves, your thinking becomes less negative, which further improves your mood, creating a positive upward spiral instead of a negative downward one. I also want to talk about the role of self-compassion in ending negative thinking, because this is something that gets overlooked but is absolutely critical. Many people treat themselves with a level of harshness and cruelty they would never direct at another person. Your negative thoughts are often attacks on yourself, and then you feel bad, and then you attack yourself for feeling bad, and then you attack yourself for not being able to fix your negative thinking. It's layers upon layers of self-criticism. Research by psychologist Kristin Neff and others has shown that self-compassion is actually more effective than self-esteem for mental health and well-being. Self-esteem is based on evaluating yourself positively, judging yourself as good or worthy. But that's inherently fragile because it depends on success and comparison to others. When you fail or struggle, your self-esteem crashes. Self-compassion is different. It's treating yourself with the same kindness, understanding, and support that you would offer a good friend who's struggling. It's recognizing that suffering and imperfection and difficulty are part of the shared human experience. It's not about excusing yourself or lowering your standards. It's about responding to your own suffering with care rather than criticism. When you notice negative thoughts, instead of criticizing yourself for having them or seeing them as evidence that something is wrong with you, you can respond with compassion. Of course I'm having these thoughts. This is hard. I'm struggling. Anyone in my situation would struggle. What do I need right now? How can I take care of myself? This completely changes your relationship with negative thinking. The thoughts themselves might still arise, but you're no longer at war with yourself. You're on your own side. Now let's address something important. None of this means that negative thoughts will disappear completely or that you'll reach some permanent state of positive thinking. That's not how the brain works, and it's not a realistic goal. Remember, your brain is wired to look for problems and threats. That's not going to change completely. What changes is your relationship with those thoughts and how much power they have over you. You'll still have negative thoughts arise. The difference is that you'll recognize them more quickly. You'll be able to observe them without getting completely absorbed in them. You'll be able to question them instead of automatically believing them, and you'll be able to choose your response instead of being controlled by them. Think of it like learning to swim. When you don't know how to swim and you fall into water, you panic and thrash around, which makes things worse. But when you know how to swim, you still end up in water, but you don't panic. You know what to do. You can handle it. The water hasn't changed. Your relationship with the water has changed. The same is true for negative thoughts. They haven't necessarily gone away, but they no longer pull you under. You know how to work with them. It's also crucial to understand that changing thought patterns takes time and repetition. Remember those neural pathways we talked about at the beginning? The negative pathways are strong because you've been reinforcing them for years, maybe decades. You can't expect to undo that in a few days or even a few weeks. Creating new pathways and weakening old ones requires consistent practice over time. This is where many people get discouraged. They try some techniques, they don't see immediate dramatic results, and they give up, concluding that nothing works for them. But that's like going to the gym once and expecting to be in perfect shape, or practicing an instrument for a week and expecting to be a virtuoso. Your brain needs time to change. Neuroplasticity is real, but it requires sustained effort. The good news is that you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to practice these techniques flawlessly. Every time you catch a negative thought and question it, every time you choose to redirect your attention, every time you respond to yourself with compassion instead of criticism, you're strengthening new neural pathways. Every single time matters. Even if you only succeed 1 out of 10 times at first, that one time is creating change. And gradually it becomes 2 out of 10, then 3, then 5, then 7. The negative patterns weaken. The new patterns strengthen. Your default mode of thinking starts to shift. I also want to acknowledge that for some people, negative thinking is part of a clinical mental health condition, like depression or an anxiety disorder, and while the techniques I've described are evidence-based and effective, they're often most effective when used as part of a comprehensive treatment that might include therapy or medication. There's no shame in needing professional help. If your negative thinking is severe, persistent, interfering with your daily functioning, or if you're having thoughts of self-harm or suicide, please reach out to a mental health professional. These techniques can be incredibly powerful, but they're not a replacement for professional treatment when it's needed. Think of it like this. If you had diabetes, you'd take insulin and also make lifestyle changes around diet and exercise. Mental health is similar. Sometimes you need the medical intervention along with the skills and techniques. Both are valid. Both are important. The goal is for you to get better, using whatever combination of tools and support actually works for you. Let me also talk about the role of lifestyle factors, because they have a massive impact on your thinking patterns that often gets underestimated. Your brain is a physical organ, and its functioning is influenced by how you treat your body. Sleep deprivation significantly impairs your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking and regulating emotions. When you're sleep deprived, your amygdala becomes hyperactive. You're literally more vulnerable to negative thinking and less able to regulate it. Nutrition matters too. Your brain needs specific nutrients to produce neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine that influence mood and thinking. If you're not eating properly, Your brain doesn't have the raw materials it needs to function optimally. Exercise is incredibly powerful. Physical movement triggers the release of endorphins and other neurochemicals that improve mood and reduce stress. It also promotes neurogenesis, the creation of new brain cells, particularly in the hippocampus, which is involved in memory and emotion regulation. Studies show that regular exercise can be as effective as antidepressant medication for mild to moderate depression. Social connection is another crucial factor. Humans are social creatures. Isolation strengthens negative thinking. Connection with others provides reality checks for your negative thoughts, offers support and perspective, and triggers the release of oxytocin, which counteracts stress hormones. Even if your negative thoughts tell you to isolate yourself, reaching out and connecting with others is often exactly what you need. These lifestyle factors aren't luxuries or optional extras. They're fundamental to your brain's ability to function well and to your capacity to regulate your thinking and emotions. Finally, I want to leave you with this. Your negative thoughts are not the enemy. They're not proof that something is fundamentally wrong with you. They're your brain trying to protect you the only way it knows how, based on evolution and past experience. The problem isn't that you have negative thoughts. The problem is the relationship you've had with those thoughts, automatically believing them, letting them control your emotions and behavior, identifying with them as truth. Everything I've shared with you today is about changing that relationship. It's about developing the skills to observe your thoughts without being controlled by them, to question them instead of automatically believing them, to respond to yourself with compassion instead of criticism, to take action that aligns with your values regardless of what your thoughts are telling you. This is the path to freedom. Not freedom from ever having negative thoughts, but freedom from being dominated by them. And that changes everything. Your thoughts will still arise, but you'll know you're not your thoughts. You're the awareness behind them. You're the one who can choose how to respond. And from that place of choice and awareness, you can build a life that's meaningful and aligned with what actually matters to you, regardless of what your brain's threat detection system happens to be broadcasting at any given moment. That's true freedom. That's what's possible for you. And it starts right now, with the very next negative thought that arises, and your choice about how to respond to it. You've got this.